Hello, so in this tutorial, we're going to learn a whole bunch of construction techniques that'll help you build faster, more accurately, and more enjoyably. I've got the list of tips lined up right here, and we're going to go through them one by one. So you have become comfortable in flying the camera around the world, and you're becoming kind of advanced at that, but you want to be able to build things kind of more quickly. One of the things you might not notice, or maybe you've picked up on, is that if I'm down near the ground, my flight is slow. The speed of my camera is slow. But if I get off the ground, like if I fly up using E and I start to fly over, I move much faster the higher I go. The assumption here is that if I have a wide vantage point and I'm looking at a lot of objects, I can see far off objects, and I'm going to want to get there. So I want to fly faster to things the higher I am. So, one of the techniques you can use to move quickly is to get off the ground and fly in from a high vantage point, and then kind of land back down, control pivot your way back down to the height you wanted to be on. Now, if you don't want to go through all of that and you want a little quicker way to do it, there's a thing called fly to. That's our first lesson. So fly to can be done from anywhere in the space. I'm going to select an object, this box. For example, I'm going to right click it and I hit fly to, and it'll take me right up to the box, and it flies me right to that location. So if I wanted to go here to these words, excuse me, I hit edit code. I can hit fly to, and it moves me and positions this item right in front of me. You can also do it from the hierarchy menu. So that box entity, I select it here. I know I might say, oh, I want to go to that. I don't even know where it is. I hit fly to, and there I am. I've flown to this object. Okay, so that's fly to. That's a quick way of getting you to a place you want to be. Actually, let's do the third one. I deleted the box and I wanted to undo it. Control Z. So we're going to go on to the second one. So commit transform changes. What does that mean? Well, Simmetiri allows what's called playtime editing. When you're in playtime, like if you pressed the play button or you pressed the space bar, pressing space bar, play is activated. If I press the space bar again or I press the play again, I'm in now what's called pause time. And you see this green line around the edge of the UI. That means we're in pause. We go back, play and pause, keep toggling until I hit escape, and that's stop time. You can see that these text items are dynamic. They follow me. They're doing what's called a look at. They look at my camera and always angle themselves so that I can read them from any view. We've got a tutorial on that you can find, and it's a nice effect for text. It only happens during playtime. If I move around during pause time, they don't come with me, but as soon as I press play, they will snap back, because that's when the code that they have on them runs. This little pink guy runs, and that's their look at code. But what that means is that you'll see that don't worry that they snap into a particular position during stop time. But what we want to take a look at is this commit transform changes. So if I move this object during playtime, I'm in playtime here, and I move this object to a place. Let's say I don't want it to be there. I want it to just go back. When I press stop, it goes back to where I started. But let's say this time I actually like where I put it. Let's say I put it here and I want it to stay there. If I just press stop, dang it comes back. So if I move in playtime and I do use playtime editing to make the transform of some object that I like my transform change, I need to do what's called commit the transform change. So to commit that, I'm going to hit, you can find it under the edit, Control T, commit transform changes. Control T. So with great power comes responsibility. With the power of being able to operate, clone, move things around, toss things around in playtime, and mess around and iterate the way that you can in Simmetiri. If you like things, it's your responsibility to commit them at the end of playtime before you exit play or pause time. So I can even do it in pause time. I can hit Control T and I commit the transform changes. If you like everything in the space and want to commit it, you can hit Control A and hit Control T after that, and you'll commit the transform changes. Additionally, you can select all items or some items, say just the boxes. After I've moved them, I can select all the boxes and commit those transform changes. So that way, when I exit pause time by hitting stop, those items will stay where I left them. Very important. With great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. So that's commit transform changes. Now, okay, let's say I'm in playtime and I forget to commit transform changes. Okay, so I'm in playtime and I move this thing over here and I make a new one and I put this one, let's say we'll put that one there, and I like this one here, and I like it just so, and then I hit stop and I'm like, oh no, here they are. They're back where they started, and I don't know, I can't even remember where I put them, and maybe you've done a lot of things. Have no fear, just catch it immediately and hit Control Z. So this is the undo. When you hit Control Z, it'll take you to the last frame of pause time and stick you in pause time. And there you can now go and do your commit transform changes. Select the items that you like, hit Control T, hit escape to exit pause time, and you're good. So again, in playtime, if you liked where you had something, say right there, and you accidentally hit escape and it ended up back there, have no fear. You can press Control Z, it'll take you to the last frame before exiting. It'll put you in pause time. You can commit that transform change and hit escape. Cool. So that's the commit transform changes. You'll find that you're doing it even at my relatively experienced level. I find myself accidentally forgetting to commit a transform change daily because I'm just really experimenting as I build. So just make sure you know that you can always just catch it immediately and hit Control Z. This is a little bit more advanced. Yeah, so you probably have already done stuff with scale. You can you scale this object by pressing R, or you can find that under Edit Tool. You can find the Scale tool. You can also recognize. You might also recognize that pressing T will get you back to the most recent tool. So let's say I'm building boxes and then I'm moving boxes. I can hit right click, and then I clone a new one, and then I want to draw another box again. Instead of going all the way back to transform and move, I can draw a new box by clicking T. So if I want to edit the shape of an object, shape. See, I want to make this thing a little bit taller. I'm actually gonna make you a new one here. So let's say I make a box like so. And I want to edit its shape. Well, I can come up here, and under the mesh model is a thing called box shape. And you'll see that the dimensions are right here. And I can make it, change its Y, change its Z, change its X. And if this thing tips over, you're going to find that these may or may not correspond with the world positions. That's why they're dimensions. They're not transforms. They're not a scale value. They are an actual sort of dimension of the underlying box shape. So you can kind of look at a thing and you'll say, oh, this is the thin side, the medium side, and the long side. So you'd say the thinnest side, the medium size, and the longest side, if you need organization there. So if I was going to make it grow taller in my case here, I would now take the small side and make it bigger. So now I've got it going kind of taller. So that's editing shape. Another way you can get into editing shape instead of going up to the menus is just double click. Double click will always open you up to box shape. Dimensions you might need to expand out, but that'll always get you in there. And that's especially helpful for text. Because text, you don't edit the text name. That doesn't do anything for change. Well, it allows you to organize. You can organize in the hierarchy with that name, but Excuse me. Oh, my caps lock is on. Grid, entity, grid view is what I was going to say. Grid view, not the name, but if you want to change the word, see, I changed the name, and that makes it change over here. But if I want to change the actual words that show on the thing, on the screen, in the world, I need to change its shape. So I can also click here under Mesh Model and go to the text shape. Just like the box shape has dimensions, the text shape has things like a font, its own size, and you'll need to go to change the text. So from grid view, I could change it to random string. So what for text, it's easy. Just double click somewhere on the words, not in the open space next to them. That doesn't do it, but on the actual like font, the extruded, piece of the words, anywhere that's white right here, it brings up grid view, and I can change it there. So that is edit shape. Also a very helpful thing for when you're constructing. Okay, but when so we're going to talk about grid view. When you come in to Simmetiri and you're given the default world, but everything is pretty free form. You can move things around free form. They can be at any position. They can be any size, rotated any angle. So we're going to learn some tools that help you build with respect to a grid. Most 3D software has a grid facing you immediately. We like kind of the sandbox view of anything goes to begin with, but of course you need a grid and you need a grid view. And in fact, so here's our grid, and we've got this grid view, and the grid is the origin of our world. Positive X goes out in this direction, positive Z goes out in this direction, Y goes up, negative Z, negative X. So grid view then, you can get into grid view by pressing G. G toggles in and out of grid view. And the other way to look at that is up here under Edit View. You'll find the grid option here, third down. You'll see show grid and snap to grid, as well as the grid unit. So this would be 0.1 meters, the grid unit. So what that means is that's the major unit that we will snap to on snap to grid. So grid view toggled with G. Snap to grid is Shift G. So snap to grid is enabled down here. Snap to grid, I'm pressing Shift G. Snap to grid disabled. Shift G enabled. All right, disabled. So we're going to enable it. So let's do some snap to grid work. If I and we're at 0.1, but let's make it even more obvious with a view grid. We'll make the unit something more like, excuse me. We'll make it something more like 0.5 even. You see the grid got much bigger. And if I take an entity here and I'm going to use my box, draw a box. And let's actually draw it right here. I'm going to move that label out of the way. And you see it's actually snapping to grid right now, trying to line itself up. I'm going to draw a box here in the positive X, positive Z, positive Y space. So pressing T, I bring my box tool back, and I'm drawing from corner, and it draws these nice little segments. So you'll see that now. Let's take a look at this object's dimensions. How do we go there? Double click, and you will see it'll open the box shape, and you'll see that I made it basically 2 units. And you'll see it just went up a tiny bit in the Y direction. The reason that is it's offset this tiny little bit from the terrain because we're in playtime. That's kind of the margin of collision. One of the things that's nice about snap to grid, obviously, is that you can build very blocky, sort of voxel-like Qbert, the older generation. you can build lots of you can build things pretty rectilinearly. This is also really good for like mazes. For example, you can grab these things and then you'll be able to during playtime playtime will things will fall off of grid, but your movements will your movements when in construction will be snapped to the grid. But you'll see that things will have freedom to move off of grid. So that's the snap to grid. Snap to grid feature. If you want to rotate something and snap it, during snap to grid, it will freely rotate if you hold down control, or if I press E, I've got this rotation. But the way to constrain rotation to 45-degree turns is to hold down shift while you're turning it, and you'll get these 45-degree turns. So if you want to, let's move on to this next thing. So that's constrain rotate, a constrained move. Now, if you hold down shift while moving something, you're going to constrain it in one of the axes. Let's line this up. So as an example, I want to move this object. If I want to move this object only in one dimension, I can hold down shift. If I want to move it, it'll move in one dimension along that plane. So the plane of the x, z, will allow it to move in just the x, or if I'm right near where it started, it'll allow it to go in the z, and it'll choose right around that center point. You'll feel it snapping. So holding down shift to move things along that axis. And again, if I want to move things along this y-x axis, holding down shift will allow it to move side to side. And instead of forward and back in the z direction, it goes up and down in the y, right where it starts. So it's sort of like you choose a side and you commit to that. So that's constraining the move. Again, holding down shift while you rotate. So if I can toggle between rotate and move by pressing control, moving the mouse a little bit. If I then hold down control and shift, I'm going to now be snapping this to 45 degrees. It begins with its offset and it keeps its offset. Photoshop's a lot like that. I'm now snapping on these 45s plus my original offset. So that'll help you, that'll help you kind of snap objects to a particular rotation or moving them along a particular axis, which will come in handy later as we learn some of the cloning capabilities. So multi-select and transforming edits is a way to, let me set this up a little. Let's say I've got two objects and I want them to have like the same I have two objects and I want them to have like the same, I want them to basically be along this same line. Basically in the z direction, I want them to be at the same place on the z direction. And I could like come along here and yeah, well, snap to grid is pretty good. Let's say I wasn't in snap to grid. Get rid of snap to grid and grid view. If I want these objects to line up, and I'm moving along, my snap to grid isn't that great. I'm moving along, I'm just holding shift to be able to move in the z direction, but I don't really know when I'm going to get these two lined up. Another way to do that is what's called multi-select and transform edit. Bring them over here to illuminate that. So I want them to have the same z dimension. So one of the ways you can do that is multi-select them here, come up to transform, and just scrub this ever so slightly, and you'll see them snap together, and then you'll move them. Again, multi-select, snap them together. And that will enable you to align them on the z-axis. And if you wanted to do it on the x-axis, for example, you'll move the x, and that allows you then to sort of have them and place them in the position that you both want them on the multi-select. Sometimes that works really well. That can get a little confusing, but it's a great way to get things to kind of line up. Let's do some copying. Let's clone out some items. Copy, Alt plus drag. So in Simmetiri, you can make two different types of copies of an object. There's what's called a copy, and there's what's called a shared copy. So to just simply copy an object, you're going to press Alt, hold down Alt, and then drag the box. And if you're in playtime while you do this, the box that gets created is going to kind of fight. The two rigid bodies are going to have their physics fight each other, and one will push the other out. And if you're not in playtime, and you hold down Alt or Option and drag, you're going to get kind of a smooth, copying experience. So the copy, and let's draw something on the grid here. We'll do this next part with the snap to grid happening. Snap to grid is enabled. So I'm going to build a box on this grid and show you the copy situation. So copy is, if I want to make this thing copied and I hold down Alt, I now have a copy that basically is totally unique unto itself. If I take that copy and I make it a different color, that's totally fine. It doesn't change the original. But if I want to do what's called a shared copy, I'm going to use what's called Control Alt. I'm going to create a shared copy using Control Alt and drag. So if I hold down Control and Alt / Option, and I pull off this other one, I will create what's called a shared copy. Now, when I change the color of the shared copy, it has the same underlying properties as the original. And so let's show you that. Let me show you that a little bit better. Place that there. If I change that, the original and the copy are changing together. You might ask, why would you want that? Well, sometimes you want like a whole bunch of things that act exactly the same. Control Alt makes you the shared copy, and maybe they're all of one type. Maybe they're all a certain like an indicator or some sort of button or part of kind of a system, or they're all one type of enemy or something. You might want them to all be go together. The other reason is they might just be background material or something. And the truth is, adding hundreds and hundreds of objects into your symmetry show can get costly. To be able to add more without computationally costly, to clarify that, and can make your show run really slow. But if you want to put a lot of objects in the space, what you're going to want to do is make them instance copies, as many as you can, because they take up less data, because they all share and point to. In this case, I don't have, I have 3 objects, but they all have one color property that they all share, which means that if I change one of them, they all change. But the memory that Simmetiri has to use is less, because it can kind of simplify its data expression of these objects. So if you want to make a lot of objects in the space, the way to go is these shared copies, and that's and scale goes with it as well. Position and rotation are not shared, but those are kind of the effects that you're gonna have to deal with. if you're going to use a shared copy. And then by default, or in essence, just the simple one, the alt drag, it's a little bit more like the way that we kind of expect copies in the world, that you get a copy that's kind of based off that original, but I can do whatever I want with it. Just like if you copied and pasted new text in the scene. So that's copy for shared copy. Let's bring one of these guys along with us into our next. Right. So we just did some. I'll make a new one here. Just did some copying from dragging with the mouse. What I'm going to show you now is a way to sort of kind of scale that up using Alt plus Shift and these arrow keys, which is pretty cool because if I take an object like this and I hold down Alt, I'll show you when I'm dragging it. So if I hold down Alt and Shift, and when I click to drag, I'm going to get it to it'll pull out along a line, and I can kind of make this lineup of these guys, and then I might be able to drag it and move it. And Snap to Grid, it kind of helps you. You can kind of get this like matrixy look, but you can see as I did this freehand, I ended up with these gaps when I built like this kind of matrix thing. If you use, which is fine, but if you use Alt and Shift plus these arrow keys, with the arrow keys on your keypad, holding down Alt, Shift, you're going to see that they clone out on the step that you have in your system under View, Grid, that grid unit. So let's do a grid unit a little smaller than this, and we'll make kind of a matrix thing. Get rid of these, and we'll do it again. So holding down Alt and these arrow keys. Very cool. And then if I kind of come above it and get this line right here and hold down Alt and Shift, I'll take the whole line and they'll move forward in that direction. And if I come to, say, for example, this side and grab them, again, holding down Alt and Shift, pressing up, 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 I now have a pretty cool matrix. We'll learn some even cooler things to do with this once you have it. So we've got this matrix. So that was, again, holding down Alt and Shift using the arrow keys. And if I press play, kind of the physics takes over. And something that's kind of cool is you realize that look of like slightly organized, slightly chaotic. It looks kind of archaeological, or it looks, like time has made these heavy blocks kind of slip into a position. Let's say I wanted to just sort of capture them there and keep them there. So I can commit their transforms. I can multi-select them. I can commit their transforms with T, and then there they are. I just took this matrix, and now I kind of have this sort of kind of ancient colonnade, perhaps you'd call that, which is pretty cool. What if I want to go back to, I hit Control Z, and I want to go back before playtime here. These steps back, and what if I just I'm trying not to grab this right here. So I can always take something out of the selection by holding down Control. It'll remove it from the selection. Let's say I just want to make these things fixed in the air. I'll grab them all, select the rigid body, and hit false on movable. And now I've got this awesome kind of floating, matrix space that I could put you on in VR. You could move around. We could have you teleport from platform to platform. There could be really interesting stuff here. You could dynamically have each of these boxes colored by its position or something. You could learn kind of forces, put vectors in here. Very cool kind of look, fun to travel through, of course. Now, what if I wanted to? This is very ordered. What if I wanted something between kind of order and chaos? Imagine I made these things um, movable for a second, and then I make them unmovable. So here's an idea. Let's rotate it onto kind of a weird axis. And then what we're going to do is set it into movable. We're going to make that true. Then we're going to hit play. Things are going to kind of crumble into this slightly ordered, slightly chaotic kind of pyramidal pattern. We've got them all selected. Right now, we want to do two things: lock their rigid bodies, or make their bodies immovable. I shouldn't say lock. Lock is a different capability here. Make them immovable, movable false, and then commit their transform changes. Control T. And now, this is physics paused. Set rigid bodies to movable false, and Control T to commit transform changes. Now you get this kind of structure, which is really pretty cool. It does really awesome stuff with the light. And if you bring in, this is the kind of thing that looks pretty cool if you were to bring a light off of it, change the time of day. Make this spotlight a little stronger. More like night. And if you added a couple more lights, you might get some interesting effects. Get some kind of cool shadows. Cool. So I'm going to bring you back into daytime, where the sky is. Get rid of the night sky and time of day. Bring it back to day. Cool. So that's grabbing a group of items, setting the rigid bodies to movable, going into pause time, selecting them, and then making their rigid bodies no longer movable and committing the transform changes, and you get these objects, these kind of shapes. Now a similar thing, I'm going to go ahead and delete that, clear up some space. You can see me selecting a large group of items over here to delete. And it's interesting, it will take a little time to delete these because it's having to rewrite over them. But I'll leave one of them here to work with. Actually, let's draw another one straight on the grid again. So to fuse something, what does this mean? Well, this is really cool. So that object over there was a whole bunch of different objects, but it wasn't one object. Now you can fuse it together to create one object. And say, for example, I want to create like a kind of like a grid item that's something like this. And I want this to all be one piece. In fact, let's bring it up one. I want this to all be one object. Really easy. You're going to press Control and D to fuse that item. So Control plus D to fuse. So Control and D, it'll take a second. And now I get this one bounding box, and it's now this thing called mesh entity. And if I press play, it all acts as one object, and the physics is appropriate. Pause time. Back to it. That's fusing. You can also fuse in like a Google Blocks model. Oops. We'll go to import and optimize. Say I want to take this chipmunk, bring in the .obj, and he will actually be. He's over here at this at the origin where he comes in. I'm gonna teach you another little trick here. If I kind of want to summon him, I can place him on my mesh entity, and it basically makes it the child of the mesh entity for a second. Then I go to the chipmunks transform and zero it out, and it's now right here in the space. And then I can unchild it. And that's a sneaky little trick to kind of center an object on another object. What we're going to do is we're going to take this Google Blocks model. Let me scale him up a little bit bigger, and we're gonna fuse him to this now fused mesh entity. And the fusing works kind of in a cascading way, keeps adding and adding to one. So if we select both of these, it's like nested layers of fusing. So we're going to add another fuse onto this. And now we have this object that's kind of like this platformed critter. And you'll notice that when he falls, however, there's no rigid body on our poor squirrel. So he gets kind of shoved underground. But if, in fact, we wanted to do that, there's another way to accomplish that. What we want to do is unfuse, just Shift Control D. Hang on a second. Let's look at it. Edit. Tool. Unfuse. Control. Oh, I hit Alt. Sorry. Alt Shift D. Oops. Alt Shift D. It unfuses. It unfuses back one layer. I can unfuse this as well if I wanted. So that's that nesting. But let's get this guy a rigid body first. What you want to do is add all rigid bodies to all objects and then fuse them. So the way to do this is this little triangle here. Select the chipmunk. Any Google Blocks model, come to this triangle at the top level. Add rigid body. So now this guy has a rigid body, and he will basically move appropriately based on his mesh. But what we're going to do is kind of fuse him together so we get this kind of like, I don't know, like a chipmunk trophy. So Control D to fuse. And now when you toss him, it kind of works properly. Cool. Okay, so that's fusing. And that's all the tricks that I was set to show you. And we'll combine a few here. We draw a box on the grid while holding Alt and Shift. Let's do it in pause time. While holding Alt and Shift, I will be able to make a copy. That's one option. Alt and Shift, pressing up, I get this effect here of kind of a stepwise cloning. Shift plus Alt, undo that. I kind of get a more clear angle. Shift plus Alt. We've got our a matrix here. Let's grab these, and in playtime we'll toss them, get them spun out like this, pick them up, rotate them, Control D. We'll fuse them in this shape. Get this interesting kind of physics shape. That's a fused item. Toss it off in the distance. And there you go, Fly 2. Commit the transform changes during playtime. Undo if you didn't. Control Z. Edit shape by double clicking. Get the grid view, G. Snap to grid, Shift G. Chaining move by holding Shift. Multi-select and transform edit to align things. Control Alt drag. There's a copy with an Alt drag. A shared copy with Control Alt drag. Alt Shift. Arrow keys. That's that stepping. That matrix and we fused. Awesome.